Greetings, greetings, and welcome to Storytime with Dr. Helen Tinsley. Happy Juneteenth. So today is June 19th, and in lieu of reading a children's story, I am going to share a keynote address that I wrote and presented on Juneteenth Day in Englewood, New Jersey in 2014. I want to preface this by saying that people sort of think Juneteenth is new and it's just becoming talked about in the media. But this is actually the 155th year since the original Juneteenth in 1865. So it's high time that America recognize some of the major contributions that African Americans have made and give us our due. Respect our day, you know, make this a national holiday. African Americans and Africans as enslaved people built this country. And so it's only fair to honor the sacrifices and struggles our ancestors made and also to give us reparations. But with that said, I want to share the keynote address that I shared Juneteenth Day 2014. I give thanks and praise to God for this precious gift of life. And I give honor and praise to my parents, Junius and Evelyn Tinsley, for instilling in me the love and compassion for self and others and the thirst for education and knowledge. My great grandparents on my paternal side were born into slavery in this country in 1823 and 1845 in Amelia County, Virginia. And their 5 children, including my great grandmother, Maud Swan, were the first generation in my family born free. So for me, the great granddaughter of former enslaved blacks in this country, to speak to you regarding this day in which we celebrate our liberation from chattel slavery is a true blessing indeed. It is also a privilege because as a lifelong educator, I am grateful to be able to share brief historical information with you regarding Juneteenth Day. In order to truly understand the significance of this day, we must take a look back at history. On New Year's Eve in 1862, black folks gathered in churches and private homes all over America, awaiting the news that the Emancipation Proclamation had actually become law. This was the first watch night service celebrated in America. Blacks have gathered in churches on New Year's Eve ever since to praise God for bringing us through another year. At the stroke of midnight on January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation declared all enslaved blacks in the Confederate States were declared legally free. However, contrary to popular opinion, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free all the enslaved blacks. It only applied to the Confederate States. Slaveholding states within the Union, including Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, and West Virginia, and counties in both Louisiana and Virginia, were not included in the Emancipation Proclamation, which left over 1 million enslaved blacks in Union territory still in bondage. So, did the Emancipation Proclamation really free any enslaved blacks? The Confederate States had seceded from the Union, so the enslaved blacks in the Confederacy were not really under Lincoln's control or jurisdiction, and the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply to states in the Union. So who did the Emancipation Proclamation really free? The real freedom was provided to those enslaved blacks within the Confederacy who escaped and made it across Union lines. In January 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed, which abolished slavery in the U.S., and 4 million blacks were freed. The Civil Rights Act of 1866, which declared all persons born in the U.S. were all citizens without regard to race, color, or previous condition, was passed by Congress over the veto of President Andrew Jackson, who was adamantly in favor of slavery and a slaveholder. The 13th Amendment is the legislation that granted freedom to all enslaved blacks in the United States. These millions of newly freed blacks began to roam the antebellum countryside many searching for family members and loved ones who had been sold off to other plantations. These were people with no money, no food, no shelter, no education, and no known way to survive, who were freed after 246 years of chattel slavery, people who were thrust into a capitalistic society without capital. Slavery has existed throughout the world as we know, but the enslavement of black people, which we know was extremely cruel, inhumane, and barbaric, also had a different aspect to it that separated it from all other known slavery. The identity was stolen from black folks. Our names, language, religion, family, and history were taken from us. And when your identity is taken, it has cyclical negative ramifications on each subsequent generation. So, as we celebrate this awesome day today, known as Juneteenth, it is truly bittersweet. Yet history is what it is, the past. We must learn our history, understand it, remember it, teach it, and pass the knowledge on to our youth and community. Today we are at a critical point in the history of our country. There is widespread social and political unrest throughout the country. There are increasing incidents of racially motivated attacks and police brutality. There are thousands of people protesting around the country and world for justice, equality, and equal protection under the law for blacks. There is widespread poverty across this nation. There are far too many unemployed people throughout the country, countless homeless people on our nation's streets, too many people scrounging daily for food, too many elderly people who worked all their lives who can't afford to maintain a decent living, and there are far too many children hungry or not receiving an appropriate education. We may have come to this country on different ships, but we are all in the same boat now. Our survival depends on one another. The late great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King so eloquently said, "No one is free until we are all free." We must begin to listen to each other in forums where we can have open and authentic conversations so that we can learn from our diverse stories. We need to find common ground and find ways to work together harmoniously with one another, or we will perish together in our dysfunction. We must protect our children and show love and concern for our elders. We must conduct ourselves with self-respect and treat one another with love and respect. We have to teach the truth of our history, no matter how painful it is, because there are far too many significant events that occurred in history that are not taught in our public schools throughout the country, excuse me. The black churches need to let their parishioners know as they fellowship every New Year's Eve for watch night that it is actually in commemoration to their enslaved ancestors who gathered that cold night on December 31st in 1862 to await news of their freedom. Children, and adults too, need to know about the Children's March that occurred in Birmingham, Alabama over 4 days in May of 1963, when 4,000 children, as young as 4 years old, marched to bring an end to segregation in Birmingham, Alabama, which was considered the most segregated city in America. The police chief, Bull Connor, ordered the fire hoses to be turned on the children and for the police dogs to be set loose on the children. Finally, the children, all 4,000 of them, were put in the city jails for up to 2 weeks. These were innocent children who only wanted equality, and despite the horrendous treatment they received, they still remained nonviolent. This event, the Children's March, was the catalyst that led President John F. Kennedy to publicly support racial equality in America and to put forth legislation for a civil rights bill. After John F. Kennedy's assassination in November 1963, the bill was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson on July 2, 1964, known as the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is not Black history. This is American history. Yet it is not commonly included in our history books. All children need to know the story of the Children's March because children, regardless of race, language, or background, need to know that they have power when organized for change and they can make a difference. This story is documented in a video entitled Mighty Times, the Children's March, and it comes along with the companion teacher's guide. Again, it's Mighty Times, the Children's March. It is available on YouTube. There are so many other stories that are not taught, such as the origin of many black colleges and universities in the country, some of which were founded by former enslaved blacks and their descendants, the history of Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was one of the wealthiest and most successful black communities in the United States during the early 20th century until the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921. The Tulsa Race Riot was a large scale, racially motivated conflict in which whites attacked the black community of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and burned the community, their homes, and businesses down. There were banks and stores and restaurants and dry cleaners and schools and every business that's needed for a community to survive existed in Black Wall Street in 1921. They burned it down. People need to know about the struggles that occur in local towns and cities throughout America. Personally, I can recall numerous incidents of racism and bigotry growing up right in my beloved town of Englewood and throughout Bergen County, even to the present day. These are just a few of the many old untold stories that need to be learned and shared. However, the weight is on us, the adults. We are the stewards of the youth in the community. I encourage each of us to make a commitment to help somebody. Work with your child or somebody else's child. Take a stand against inferior education, the school to prison pipeline, and mass incarceration. Read, and read some more, and then share the knowledge. Our beloved late sister Maya Angelou said, "When you learn, teach. When you get, give." Juneteenth is the oldest known celebration commending the ending of slavery in the United States. On June 19, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger landed in Galveston, Texas, carrying news that the war had ended and that all enslaved blacks were free. This was a full 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation had become official. Let me repeat that. This was a full 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation had become official. So that meant the enslaved blacks in the state of Texas, and we don't who knows where else, were still living under chattel slavery and bondage for 2.5 years after they were technically supposed to be free. That day, June 19th, became known as Juneteenth, and starting in Galveston, Texas, it became a day of fellowship, celebrating black survival and for gathering remaining family members. On January 1st, 1980, Juneteenth became an official state holiday in Texas, spearheaded through the efforts of Al Edwards, a black state senator, who has worked long and hard to spread the observance of Juneteenth throughout the country. Juneteenth is a day to celebrate the abolition of slavery, the freedom of blacks in this country, the struggles and sacrifices we made, and the achievements that we have made. It is also a reminder to all of America of the significant contributions that blacks have made to American society. Malcolm X told us, "Education is the passport to the future, but tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today." So, in closing, we each have a role and responsibility to our youth and communities. So let's step up to the plate and all do our part to make this world a better place. This day is truly the day for celebrating the independence of blacks in this country. Let this day light a spark in each of us to do more, to do better, to support our youth and rebuild our communities. Finally, in the words of Queen Mother Moore, the late great activist, each one reach one, each one teach one. Thank you, God bless you, and happy Juneteenth Day. So, with that said, I hope that this was informative to those who don't know much about Juneteenth Day. It's interesting that it's been shrouded in our history. This is the 155th anniversary of the first Juneteenth Day, and it's not something that's been taught in schools. I was a history major in undergrad college. I never heard of Juneteenth Day. So when we know these things, we have to teach it. And not just teach it to black youth, but to teach it to all youth, because that's the problem with history. History has been taught from a one-sided perspective. And so when we talk about white privilege, or when we talk about microaggressions, and when we talk about bias and racism and prejudice, the stories are so slanted because history has been so intentionally taught from a warped perspective. So, at any rate, we all have a responsibility. Share what you know, share when you know, learn, share, and continue to grow and develop. With that said, be well, be blessed, and tomorrow I will be back sharing children's books for you for story time. Peace.